assessment model developed by the Village of Wisdom. And it supports Black parent community researchers to co-lead a dream process amid COVID for Black students, parents, and teachers of Black students in North Carolina. They're really an amazing resource center for lots of different educational facilities. Will is the founder, executive director, and I love this title, Chief Dreamer of the Village of Wisdom, a community-driven organization in North Carolina dedicated to closing the academic opportunity gap by protecting the Black genius and the positive racial self-concept of Black learners through the love and wisdom of their families and communities. That's an amazing sentence. And as I read some of the materials, and you'll get to see them, the whole concept of Black genius is just terrific. And then Dawn is familiar to many of us as a community psychologist. She serves as the director of participatory research at the Village of Wisdom, and she is a community cultivator and space creator with the vision to create dreams and cultivators and implementers across the nation and the world. No one ever said that Dawn was modest in her ambitions to change the world so that Black and brown people, their children, their communities can thrive. It's a joy to turn this over to Dawn and Will. I think we're going to have a very exciting presentation and, as always, a discussion. So they will facilitate this. This is not a place where we're going to sit quietly, but we're going to get engaged. So welcome to all, and I'm going to turn it over to Will and Dawn. And do I see a picture of Will yet? Yeah, nope. You haven't come on with your video yet.
Well, thank you. If it's okay, I have yes, thank you, Tom. I have a little bit of a little pause, and hopefully this will work well. So in the process of us sharing our presentation, I wanted to share this with you all and just pause for a minute and do some visioning. So just quickly, you all, I wanted to pause and do some visioning because the title of our presentation is We the Ones Who Dream. This is a shout out to William Jackson's hometown of Atlanta, Big Boy, and others. But they have an amazing song called We the Ones Who Fight. And I wanted to make that reference as we think about using the dream assessment model for community-driven solutions. So I am Dawn X. Henderson. I am representing many, many ancestors as I stand in this space, and I'm here with you all. To just keep the flow, I want to practice something that Village of Wisdom does is invite you all, if you could, in the chat, share the name of a Black genius that you know or you want to bring into this space. So I'm going to ask you all to drop it in the chat, a Black genius that you know or someone you want to bring into this space. It could be one of your ancestors, it could be a friend, it could be a scholar, it could be a historian, but drop that person into the space. Thank you. Thank you for all who put sister hooks up in here. Appreciate. Hopefully moving in that spirit. All right. So just in transitioning, we also want to invite folks, if you are feeling the spirit today, you're feeling the spirit, feel free to, if you have access to social media, any channels or whatever, if there's anything that resonates with you, we ask that you use these hashtags today. So hashtag protect Black Genius. Feel free to follow us on social media at Village of Wisdom and hashtag keep dreaming. So we just ask that if there's something during this presentation that's resonating with you, you're feeling the spirit, you're catching the dream today, please post it and make sure you shout out Village of Wisdom. So also I wanted to just make a little small note. I believe the original announcement indicated 12 to about 1:30, but I think we saw something that may have said 60 minutes. So we acknowledge that folks may have to transition from this space. If you do, just go ahead and do what you need to do. And I believe this will be recorded for folks to review and see later. And if I'm right, Tom, it's on YouTube, correct? And on the Scrawl's website?
It's on the Scrawl website.
Okay, excellent. So just letting you all know how to do that. All right, so I am going to transition it over just a little bit to my beautiful brother, Dr. William Jackson.
Shoot. What's up, y'all? Thanks again, Professor X, for inviting me and roping me into this. I really appreciate it and excited to talk to folks today. And thanks to Scrap for opening up this space for like an ongoing conversation here. My name is William Jackson, as folks have already kind of intimated, and I'm originally from outside of Atlanta, as Don also kind of said. And you know, I'm really passionate about this work. I'm passionate about Black children getting an opportunity to learn in their best learning environments. And I'm really passionate about us really recognizing the wisdom and the intellect that Black parents bring to the education system that I feel like has been overlooked for so long at best. And many times just downright discouraged from being included. So that's just a little bit about what drives me. As folks have kind of already talked about, you know, our organization really was conceived to translate the wisdom of Black parents into culturally affirming learning strategies. And what we saw early on was that parents were really aware of what wasn't right with their children's school. The kind of broken link though, however, was that it did not seem that teachers were really hearing them and understanding their issues, because it was pretty loud and clear to us early on that parents were aware that their children weren't interested in what was going on in school. They were aware there wasn't enough Black history happening in their school. And they were also aware that their children had issues of trust with the teachers. And so given all of that, I think a lot of times educators and people inside the school environment were mishearing those parents and not really recognizing the wisdom. And so as an organization, we really kind of transformed ourselves to one that was concerned with using research to back up what parents had said. So there's a research theory about DC and Ryan that talks about interest awareness, that really that says that if somebody isn't interested in a learning task, then they're not going to be able to do rigorous learning. A lot of folks are probably familiar with Brene Brown's work, and she talks a lot about vulnerability and trust. And so if a child can't trust the teacher, then they can't learn in that classroom, they can't love in that classroom, and they can't create in that classroom. And so really our mission is about making sure that Black learners have learning environments that allow them to trust who they're learning from and to be able to create, to be able to love, and to be able to learn in those environments. So this is me just trying to break it down and maybe get some different words for who we are and what we do. And what we're actively doing to do that is putting Black parents in leadership opportunities to execute on their dreams. And so we'll talk more about that. And really that's kind of what's driven us to the CDR work and the dreams assessment work that we're talking about today.
Thank you so much. So again, just to lay out the landscape just a little bit. what are our hopes for you all? What are our hopes for you all? So by the end, we hope that you will be able to describe the dream assessment model, that you will embrace this idea of what we call the dream assessment versus need assessment space, and really begin to envision this dream assessment in action. And I hope that that again, you know, as Will laid out, you all will see how you can apply this right within your context, and possibly see Village of Wisdom as a partner in this work. So looking forward to that. And just a little reminder, we have opportunities for folks we have some questions for you all. If you have any specific questions, I will ask that you hold those to around the end of the session, and we have some space and time allotted to that. All right, thank y'all. That's you, Will.
Okay. So I'm supposed to kind of talk a bit about like why the dream assessment and like how did we come up with this term? Like why were we so interested in doing dream assessment? And so I'll start off just by giving y'all a bit of a story. Like, you know, why it typically comes from a place and experiences that we have. And one of the reasons that I think we came to this idea, you know, talked about the universe earlier, that there was a situation that happened while I was given a professional development in a school. And while I was given this professional development in the school, I remember overhearing this white teacher basically saying that she couldn't wait for Black genius to die. And just to give some context there, we had been working in this particular school, trying to help the teachers adopt this Black genius framework that we came up with that had been kind of co-created with Black parents. And, you know, somebody had kind of come back to me and they were just like, you know, I heard this one teacher say, I can't wait for Black genius to die. And to be honest with you, like when we were originally coming up with Black genius, in some ways, like we knew that this moment would come. We knew that if we were explicit about saying that Black children and Black people in general have something to contribute to society in a white supremacist society, that somebody was going to say something out of their mouth and they were going to out themselves. The challenge here, though, is that we had no power to remove that teacher. If I was principal of that school, that teacher would have been gone the next day. But that teacher probably is still teaching at that school. And so one of the issues, one of the reasons why the dream assessment was so necessary is that we were looking for ways that we could execute and leverage power in a system that right now is just not designed for Black parents and Black folks to have a lot of power over it. And as a lot of people I'm sure can appreciate on this call, as I'm assuming like a lot of folks have been in graduate and PhD programs, one of the ways that we create power is by creating knowledge. And in many ways, this lie of white supremacy that we live under and the ways that is executed inside of our school systems has been created, right? Like we can tie that back to like a set of knowledge, if you will, that has been decided and then used to basically give one group more power over the other. And so understanding this like very common frame that everybody says that knowledge is power, we were like, what does it look like for us to create knowledge? Because one of the other things I realized, and I did a Google search on this, and I just Googled like, well, who are education thought leaders? And maybe this is the wrong slide. Oh yeah, I talked about this is power, my bad. So let's go to the next one. And when you Google education thought leaders, this is the type of picture that comes up, right? Like a whole lot of people that don't look like me, a whole lot of people that don't look like the students that a lot of times are on the wrong end of academic achievement inside of this country. And when people talk about opportunity gaps and achievement gaps and students that aren't learning a lot of times the people who are informing the curriculum, informing the instructional decisions, informing the big strategy conversations that we're having in education do not look like the kids who are bearing the brunt of the wrong side of that particular equation. And so if these are who the education leaders are, you have to ask yourself, Are they connected to Black parents like me and Dawn? Are they connected to Black parents that look like my parents and the parents of the students that I taught back in the day? Like, are they connected, right? And if they are disconnected from them, then how could they really be creating strategies, curriculums, educational frameworks that are for the benefit of Black students and Black and brown students for that matter? And the answer to that question for me was no, they cannot be. Like this is not gonna work. Like these people are not necessarily in a great position to have this conversation. So what we said is what would it look like? So I'll go back to what I said a little bit earlier. Y'all remember Black parents kind of came and told me like, well, you know, we're not very interested in this. The students aren't really interested in this school. There's not enough Black history here and they don't trust the teachers. Well, like I started to kind of describe earlier, there was research that validated each one of those ideas. But what if we actually made the parents the researchers? What if we leverage community-based participatory research and the things that we learn from that particular framework and actually put them in a position to assess what should happen inside of our schools? And in particular, because one thing that's always got on my nerves, like it's always rubbed my soul the wrong way, is that people always want to do needs assessments. What do you need as a family? What do you need to help you because you are needy and helpless? Like that's the framing that I hear. When I hear the word needs assessment, I hear somebody with a patriarchal or just this idea of charity. Like I need to do something for you, right? No. Like that's not what I'm interested in, right? Like I am here working with these people because they reflect me, because their destiny is tied up in my own. And so what I'm really worried about, what I'm really concerned about, what I really want to understand from you are what are your dreams? What dreams do you have for education in your community and in your society? And to me, that guarantees that we come from a strength-based lens. That guarantees that I'm asking people to think not just about like, what is the bare minimum, but what does thriving look like? And so often when I think we're concerned about needs, we never have this conversation about what it would actually take to get people to thriving. And so we said, hey, you know, we got this idea of 5 Black parents, 5 Black mamas. Like, we want you all to help us assess the dreams of your community about what learning would look like in this kind of COVID pandemic space, right? Like, what would it look like to understand what digital and at-home learning would look like? And we want to put you 5 Black mamas in the position of researchers to ask this question. And this is kind of where I'll end this conversation because I'm gonna hand it over to Dawn, but really what I said initially that this was about power, right? Like, as we do this stuff, right, most of the times folks that look like the parents that are at the bottom of this slide are not in the power conversation. They're not the ones that are talking about data. They're not the ones that are bringing the assessment to the conversation. They're not the ones that are leading the IEP. They're not the ones that are making decisions about curriculum. They're not the ones that are choosing the books that are inside of their children's school. And then we wonder why those same students that come from these parents aren't interested in what's going on. They never were involved in the decision-making process. But the kind of light bulb moment for me was that when I sat in a session where Denise and Regina were and that's 2 of the parents that you see below that Dawn kind of beautifully made these like graphics of them. They sat in a session and they asked these questions to students, parents, and teachers. And I promise I'm not gonna steal your shine here, Dawn. But like when we got in the room with the teachers, to see these Black mamas ask them, what are the dreams that you have for Black children? And I just want you to think about the power shift and the dynamic shift that happens in that moment. Typically, the questions are always being asked of the parents. Well, what are you doing at home? What's the lessons that you're doing? Why aren't you showing up to our meetings? Why aren't you coming to the PTA meetings? But in this instance, the parents were the ones who dictated when this happened. The parents were the ones who dictated the questions, and the parents were the ones who dictated the flow of information. And even more than that, they get to hear from teachers, what are the dreams that you have for my children? Do you even have a dream for my child? Do you have a dream for my child that are for children that look like my own? Right, and hearing what teachers tried to come up with in that moment just made me recognize how off our system is. Like, we don't have these conversations, and then we wonder why a child might be disinterested in what we're learning. We wonder why a child might not trust us for our learning. Like, we just expect children to trust us. But we haven't even asked them what their deepest aspirations are while we're doing this thing called education. And so for me and the people that I'm associated with, I hope I never do a needs assessment again. Because all I'm really interested in are dream assessments.
Feel free if you need to take a deep breath, because that's the beauty I get to work with, y'all. And I was searching for that dream for a long time as a community psychologist. So as we mentioned, we want to open up this space and we want to allow you all to share. When you think about this concept of dream assessment, how does it shift the orientation for you all in thinking through the work? So what is the difference? Like, even saying dream assessment versus needs assessment, think about that somatically, what it does to your body. We invite you all to just share out those initial thoughts, and even share some reflections in terms of what you heard Brother Will mention. And if I can give you a little bit more context, this is a brother by the name of Anthony Morgan. And I thought this was just a powerful quote. He says, one of the first casualties of systemic oppression is the freedom imagination of the oppressed. By freedom imagination, I mean the ability to truly dream and see beyond the boundaries of the systemic injustice faced by one's people in order to envision a future where they are properly supported and encouraged to realize their fullest individual and collective potential. What does it mean to orient us towards a dream assessment? All right, don't all rush.
No, I've always loved asking people about what are the strengths in their community as opposed to what the problems are. But the twist in this that's brilliant is you have the Black parents ask the teachers that question. So it shifts not only the content, but the power in the process. And that's quite stunning.
Yes, yes. And I want to thank you, Tom. I think, again, it was transformative for the parents themselves. And I'll talk a little bit about that. I wanted to acknowledge, Michelle, you raised your hand.
I was just sitting here thinking about like, schools are so dehumanizing to Black children and their families. They just really are. And my own experiences with the school system, I've been kind of reflecting on while you're talking. And it's like, I mean, I don't even want to engage because I already know, that I'm going to get talked down to, I'm going to get dismissed, I'm going to get told about all the things. Like one time I showed up and, they gave me referral to parenting classes, right? Like it's just without even talking to me, right? And I guess that I think the framing here, I like it because it brought to mind like how much I've been seeped in this power dynamic with schools and how little power parents have in schools. Any parent, but particularly parents of Black kids. And I guess I'm curious as you move forward to hear more about like how you convince parents to, show up and claim that power when the whole slate of experiences so far has been just encouraging withdrawal, right? Like, why would I yet again have another meeting with the teacher and the team about my child, knowing that I'm just going to get talked down to and dismissed the entire time, and you know, taken as a, like, I'm not even an expert in my own child. So I think I'm kind of rambling. I apologize, but I think you know, it brings to mind to me how traumatizing, I don't know how else to explain it, traumatizing the experiences of interacting with schools are.
Thank you, Michelle. I'll bring some of that learning into the next section. Anybody else?
I don't know how to raise my hand, but I was just going to say, I really love this. And I can see how it can apply to other communities as well. In some focus groups I did with like transgender and gender diverse youth, I was trying to like be very careful to not ask about needs, because sometimes you can't visualize them when you're living in this like oppressive world that isn't able, or you're not even able to think about what that might be. And so we did ask them, like, what do you dream for your community? Like, what do you, and I hadn't had this language at the time. It was just like a prompt we ended it with. And we were able to get these sort of responses that I don't think we would have asked if we focused on like their actual realities, but like encouraging people to think beyond that. It was super helpful. So I really commend, this is incredible. Thank you for all of this.
Thank you, Danny. Anybody else? Maybe one more question, or not a question, but thoughts, reflections, specifically around what you heard and shifting our orientation from needs to dream assessment. Yvette?
Hi. It resonates a great deal with me, and particularly, I would say it's parallel in some ways to Tara Joss's work, who promotes working with families and communities to identify the community cultural wealth, the ways in which immigrants and other people of color know how to navigate systems, but are blocked by structural factors to navigate the systems, utilizing the cultural capital that they have. And I love the language that you use. It's very liberatory. And I think that if we spend enough time and energy within communities, understanding communities, the families, the parents will trust us, and their own agency will get mobilized. We don't have to empower them. They're already empowered. And thank you so much for sharing this model, because it's very helpful. It's a whole other way of looking at our communities as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvette.
There's one comment. I believe it's Excel. And I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name. But I appreciate you dropping that about kind of like the teachers and what folks are looking for, because I think you're right. And this is something that, you know, it's hard to kind of like balance. Nice, I got it right, Excel. Balance is just that, like, we also don't want teachers, we recognize that in many ways, and this is something that we're working on or looking at within our model, is how do we get teachers and parents on the same page, right? Because the teachers who showed up to be a part of this conversation, as opposed to those who didn't want to. And a lot of times, like, leadership and state legislatures and superintendents are typically the people who are more so like the ones who parents are probably really at odds at. And so, like, helping teachers and parents find solidarity through a process like this, I think is also really important, because they're, whether we like it or not, they're really at the bottom of the power structure in these systems. Like, teachers and parents are at the bottom of the power structure. And just like in many other cases in our society, those people who are at the bottom of the power structure are pitted against each other to argue with each other about, you know, well, I got the more power, or I have a little bit more power than you. which then protects like this unchecked power of those who are above them, right? And so what does it look like for those two groups to really get on the same page? Because then they can be really disruptive to the systems that have been put in place that really kind of lead to teachers being underpaid, under supported. There was a lot of like instances of like teachers being afraid to actually stand up for Black students that we found out through this process, and parents weren't even aware of. So like, I just appreciate you raising that, and I just wanted to kind of bring that into the conversation.
Thank you. So we're gonna transition just a little bit, you all, and anchor this a bit more. So, you know, in terms of thinking about what Will alluded to, the community-based participatory research approach, taking that approach, but kind of redefining that approach. So within that, we use community-driven research for a reason, because we're talking about centering the voices of those who are in proximity to the very solutions needed, right, within their community. So if you look at this work and you look at the approach that we took, we centered Black voices. We centered Black mother voices in this piece, right? And bringing forward their particular personal power, their voice, and they're activating, again, their personal power to articulate not only as Michelle, you alluded to, them remembering, right, their own traumatic experience of navigating the public education system, but the ways in which they were able to exercise their own agency within that system. And as Will alluded to, dreaming about themselves in the future for themselves within that. So that was really important for us. Again, I think it was Danny, you talked about even framing the questions themselves. So we started with, instead of ending, we started with, what dreams and aspirations do you have? Putting them into that dream space first, because that is the idea, is that when you put people into the future, it's like projecting. If I can see myself into the future, then I begin to start making the steps needed, right, for that future to come true. So in addition to what Will talked about, preparing and supporting these Black women parents to become researchers themselves, they were critical and essential partners, again, collaborators in developing the protocol and thinking through the questions that we had within the protocol, and helping to guide what we call the sense making. So again, once we gathered those findings from that particular research, they help to make sense. But more importantly, I like to say the meaning making. So translating the findings of that work into what I would call these indicators. So really telling us what needs to happen here. And so the journey, as Will alluded to, a big part of that was creating a vision for our parents. So if you all see this kind of cartoon-like version of them, it was important that as we articulated the dreams, that we saw these women as super sheroes, right? If you think about the comic style, that these were the fierce five, we call them, you know, like Wonder Black women, you know, in leading this work. So it was important that we position them as framing around this work. So in that engagement, these parents, these Black parent researchers, again, similar, they obtain learning around ethics and research. They obtain learning on principles of facilitation, so in facilitating focus groups. But one of many learnings from that was the perspective taking that Will alluded to, that when they were in these spaces with the teachers themselves, and they asked the teachers, what dreams do you have for Black children? And they noticed themselves the difficulty of those teachers in translating that. When they noticed themselves, when teachers talked about the ways in which they were trying to advocate for Black students, how teachers articulated the consequences, the punitive nature of the system, or the repercussions that the teachers had to face. So just in that moment, not only were they able to kind of understand the challenge of dreams by teachers, but also to recognize, as Will said, that there is something that we are in this together if we can dream together, right? That there's a common enemy that is a system that doesn't allow us to engage in more conversations and more dialogue so that we ourselves are coming together in partnerships between parents and educators to lead this work. I also want to talk about the transition from, as I said, the findings. So, you know, I think it was Michelle talked about when parents go into the school. So our parents said, education leaders, you got to come to us. So they convened leaders across 3 school districts. They developed the meeting and they facilitated the findings to these leaders. They decided how that space will be governed. And although there were some leaders who wanted to question some of the data itself, they directed that. And so the question was, why are you not there, education leader, if you say that you care about? And moving from that process, the parents said, we are not done with just producing reports. We came together, and really, Tom, this is a shout out to you because I think you and I had a conversation, right? When I was saying, yeah, you know, that we did this dream assessment. We want to, you know, we're thinking about this idea of turning these assessments actually into what we call commandments. Or if you think about the Black Panther Party 10-point plan, right? So how do we lay out not just findings, but how do we lay out the recommendations that express the conditions needed for schools to really accept Black children, for Black children to thrive? And so this was what we call the dream mammoths. And you'll see this at kind of the end of this journey. So in that, I would like to invite, because I believe that some of this has to be embodied. So I'm going to invite you all, if you could, one person at a time, to take yourself off mute. And I'm going to ask you all to read through the dream mammoths. Thank you, Danny. Just take yourself off mute and let's read them together.
Black students and their families collaboratively inform and co-create strategic goals, action plans
with schools to meet their learning needs. Black students lead
and
and
guide
guide
teachers
teachers
and
schools
schools on
on culturally
affirming practices, ensure their autonomy, cultural expressions,
and
and realities are affirmed.
affirmed.
This is even more powerful because I did not plan for that to happen, but it sounds lovely. Are we all cool with everybody reading this together?
Sure.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if you wanted us to read one by one or all together.
No, I love it. Come on. Yes.
I think all together speaks it into existence.
Absolutely. Teachers
Reflect and share
the
the
racial
racial and cultural experiences of our Black students. Schools create spaces, opportunities, and provide resources
to
to
support
support the hiring
and
and retention of Black teachers.
Schools create spaces, opportunities, and provide resources that allow Black students to thrive in learning environments.
Teachers
Teachers use the Black Genius framework to establish trust with Black learners,
to nurture their interests
and their
in the pursuit of social justice
in
the learning environment.
Incorporate Blackness, Black learning traditions, for example, tactile, kinesthetic, familial into the learning environment. Black sources of information such as literary materials, art, and other mediums reflect our history and is a priority in schools. Instruction in the learning environment is personalized and not constrained by local or state curriculum standards. The dreams, aspirations, and diverse intellectual talents and abilities of Black learners are nurtured and valued.
Thank you all. We did not plan for that, but as I say, the ancestors are always working in their magical ways, in the ways that they need to work for us to be in this space. So just imagine as you read out those dream mammoths, if that were true, if we saw that in our systems of education, or even in other systems, what does that feel like? What would that look like? This is the space that we are inviting you all to. So just, if anybody would be willing to share, just quickly, not this answer to this question, but what did that feel like? What did you feel when you were reading and hearing these dream memories?
Opens up possibilities unimaginable. It's huge.
Thank you, Tom.
I think there's something important about speaking things into existence. And so just for me saying that out loud, but also thinking about, you know, from the family's perspectives and from the child's perspectives, you know, I've had experience running a African-centered community-based school before, and just to understand the power in speaking that into existence. Like these are our, you know, commandments. This is what we have this is our social contract, you know? And so I think it's powerful and inspiring.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. What are other thoughts? Particularly when we think about community-driven. So these 5 Black women researchers did not end with producing findings in the dream assessment report, but they translated those findings into a list of conditions needed for Black children and Black families to thrive. And in reading through that, I mean, for me, when I'm listening to you all, you know, again, I always go to the somatic reaction. What was I feeling in just hearing you all say that? What was going down my spine and tingling in my hands and my feet, particularly my feet, because my feet helps to move me, right? And my hands help to build and to be able to create. And so as I think about where I am in the village, what is the role of my hands to cultivate and nurture and to continue to support and create spaces for more Black parents, more community members to be in the space, because they are in proximity to the toxic air but they also in proximity when we allow them to understand that they do not have to continue to breathe in that toxic air. That they get to have dreams, but they get to create solutions, and creating solutions that will allow them to no longer breathe in toxic air. So this is not a preaching session. Hopefully it doesn't turn into that. But I am interested in just thinking and reflecting on what you saw. And I think Will may have posted the dream amendments, and I'll put them in the chat again. But we are interested in this question, you know, how do we envision, how can you envision, thank you, Will, these dream mammoths in different ways? How can they turn into actually commitments by community, by school leaders, by schools? Share that vision with us. Is it Lexi?
Yeah, I have a question, if you don't mind. I was wondering how, because all of this is so fantastic and amazing, and I have deep appreciation for both of you. Thank you so much. I was wondering how the dream assessment model fits in or does not fit in with the concept of radical imagination.
I'm gonna go back to the quote. And Lexi, I guess, you know, maybe I would ask you, let me first just say my interpretation of radical imagination. So I know there's literature around that, but for something to be radical, I'd like to say that it is probably antithetical to a system that is about oppression, right? And so radical imagination to me is not only to imagine a system, an alternative reality, but it's also the execution of, you know, just like when we talk about the dream assessment, there's dream space, but there's moving dreams out of the ether and into actual actions, into actual, like these dream mandates, right? So I'm not just telling you this, but I'm giving you a pathway to actually make this come true. So that's my interpretation, but that's, you know, if I answered your question directly.
Yeah, I appreciate it a lot. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think, and we'll talk a little bit about this later, but the question kind of reminds me of the work that one of our coworkers does, where she's actually, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, so I won't go into it too deeply, but her work is really centered around us creating art installations and events to celebrate liberatory practices of the past, but also to dream those of the future. And one of the things that she talks about, why she's like so passionate about getting parents involved in creating sculptures and like, you know, physical installations, is she's just like the practice of making what you have imagined come real is one of the more important liberatory practices that we can kind of engage in, right? And so one of the things that she's actually done is actually worked with her Black parent curator, is what we call them, to translate these dream mandates into physical like installations, but also kind of like classrooms, right? Like what, and I think, you know, from what I kind of somewhat gather, radical imagination is like to think about new systems, right? And so like a lot of times what we talk about is, especially in her work, is that there are Black genius classrooms outside of the school, and the degree to which we can imagine those classrooms. And this is actually a challenge that I also pushed to our parents, because they were like, you know, well, what are we going to do in the school system? How are we going to change all of that stuff? And, you know, one of the things that I asked them, I was like, what do you want to change? Like, you know, just forget the school for a second. Like, how do you want education to really change this, to be different? Like, what do you want learning to look like? and what can you kind of control, right? Like without like saying, oh, I'm gonna change this about the school system. And I think that that's important because to your point around like this radical imagination thing, if we don't think about like a Black genius classroom that exists outside of the school, then it's difficult for us to imagine the possibilities of that because in some ways, our mind is thinking, well, we can't do that inside of a school. But when you remove the barrier of, well, this has to happen in the school, then that is no longer kind of hindering your imagination. And I think the other thing I just kind of talked myself into another realization that I think was important about this is that because of the practice of the parents being engaged in the research, in the way that we shared it with them, a lot of them talked about the fact that like, one of the parents said, like, if I knew research was like this, I would have done it a long time ago. Another one of the parents talked about like, you know, I really appreciated the fact that I didn't have to code switch while I was learning this and experiencing this. And this is kind of gets into like my nerd area. So I'm from ed psych. And so like I did a lot of research on cognitive load and working memory. And like, I think it is inconsequential. I think it is actually a huge deal when Black and Indigenous people get to learn in experiences that do not require them to code switch, because that is not only is it valuable cognitive bandwidth that folks need to be able to do the task at hand, but I think it also, to your point, depletes our radical imagination. Because if I have to be concerned of how I'm going to translate myself to you, or to translate what you said back to me, then that reduces my ability to imagine what this world could be outside of that thing. And so I think part of the reason that we got such radical dream madness is because of what you said. And that's it's not just a philosophy, it's also process. And so like, what are the processes that you create as you're teaching people that allow them to dig to this place that elicit kind of the things that are deep down inside? But if you never called those things forth, then there's no way that you ever actually have access to those dreams.
Yeah, this is such a rich, amazing conversation. I am so grateful for it, and I think it's so important. Two things that you mentioned that I just wanted to echo back is one, the like transformative power of art, which I very much believe in as an artist myself. And the second part is like the power of like working outside the system to be able to like transform inside the system. So I think that both those things are powerful and revolutionary. Thank you.
Thank you, Lexi. Anyone, any other sort of insights or comments before we transition? Oh yeah, yes. Come on in.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's a little bit distorted, but I can hear you.
Sorry, something is wrong with my internet. That's why I'm trying to keep my camera down. I just want to say how much I appreciate your work. And I agree with what Michelle said in the comments that when we were reading this was very empowering, but I also in the back of my mind keep thinking, why is this not common? Why are we not doing this everywhere? How come there is so much resistance to this type of work? And so I just want to send you, if I could share the power that I have, I would love to share it with you so that you can keep doing this work, because this cannot be easy. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh yeah. Yeah, at the end we actually have it set up, so I would love to, just because given time, we have a form for folks who are interested. So if you want, we could drop that in early. Well, I would love to get all your contact. Yeah, I do have some of it, but yeah, I would love to.
It sounds like people may be leaving, so drop it in. Yes.
Yes, thank you, Tom. So we do acknowledge that some of you all may need to transition. So just acknowledging that, but we're gonna go ahead and move forward into like the last piece of all this. and open the floor up for some Q&A.
So the thing that I'm here to kind of talk about is that, you know, we had these dream mammoths, right? And so obviously the question that a lot of the parents asked us was like, well, what they said initially is, what are y'all gonna do next? And I was like, what are y'all gonna do next? Like, what do you want to do? What do you want to see happen? And there's two concrete ways that we've actually kind of moved this work forward. There was one way that we knew we would be moving forward, which was really translating these dream mammoths into tools that parents and teachers could use in the classroom. So from the beginning, we knew that from the data that was found, that we would actually run a user-centered design process that would lead to the creation of a toolkit. And we wanted to create a toolkit both for parents and teachers. And so by this time, I had convinced Dawn to come on full time. And so she really took on the responsibility of leading and being a part of this user-centered design process, where the Black parents who came up with the Dream Mammoths and the Keep Dreaming report were actually put in a meeting with another set of parents who, a lot of them were homeschooling parents. So they had this kind of interesting mix of being like an educator while also being a parent at the same time. And those parents that came up with the dream report and assessment communicated or presented their findings to the parents who were the homeschoolers. And there were some teachers in there and just some parents that weren't homeschooling as well. And in that group of parents went through a user-centered design process where they actually developed the Dream Mammoths into a set of strategies. And so as a part of this process, like, they actually tested the process out on their own children, a lot of them. Some of the teachers, you know, tested out some of the stuff in their classroom. And they came back and they said, like, some of these ideas we came up with, like, we got to throw those away. That didn't work, right? The way that we're talking about this, it didn't work with my kid. But this is how it did work. So we actually had this process where they were kind of both the designer and the user because of their experience. And so then the final product ended up being this Keep Dreaming Toolkit, which we dropped, I think in like November, October of last year. And so far, like, I think the toolkit's been downloaded close to 500 times. And thanks to some survey magic from Dawn, like, it's been shared with 13,000 people. And one of the things that we kind of keep on getting back as a feedback point is that parents say, like, how useful the tool is, which I hear them saying, like, basically, I know that another parent created this. Because, like, when I went to try it out, like, I could see, like, oh, how I could actually do something like this with my students. So that, gave us a lot of, that's definitely a proud moment, right? Like, you have parents kind of randomly, we'll see posts on Facebook or somebody kind of telling us, like, did you read the Keep Dreaming Toolkit? And you just kind of like, yeah, I did. The Keep Dreaming Toolkit. So I think, that was pretty cool. And then one of the ways that we're about to work on is to actually translate these dreams, the Dream Mammoths, into policy. So as a lot of you all know, school boards have a fair amount of power in most places. There are a lot of state legislatures that are right now trying to threaten the power of school boards right now, especially in southern states where you have more liberal cities or more Black and brown cities, and those school districts have control. That being said, they can still adopt policy, right? And so we're looking to kind of work with policy writers and other folks who kind of understand that world to try to translate those policies into things that school board members could easily adopt and integrate into their schools for a lot of the reasons that folks already talked about. I think Ola talked about this earlier, like, why don't we see more of this? And part of the reason is because people don't know better, right? Like, sometimes some of this is like, if you know better, you would do better, right? Especially in situations where, like in Durham, like, we have a fairly agreeable superintendent, a fairly agreeable, school board. All of these people want to do right. But part of the problem is that a map for how to do right has not necessarily been most clearly created, right? And so we're doing this for the benefit of those school systems that could actually put policies into place that could protect students for a long time coming, and really get school systems engaged in practices that will lead to the outcomes that are dreamed up in the dream amendments. And so, I mean, we're, obviously, like, we're really excited about the potential of that. And then, obviously trying to make all this stuff accessible. So the last thing I'll just say is that, like, not only did we come out with that report that was probably like 12 or 15 pages, but then we actually had a designer take the strategies and boil them down to basically an Instagram post. And so we posted that stuff through our Instagram account to get people and parents to share that stuff. So, like, you don't even have to download the whole account. Like, you ain't even got to have a super fancy computer. Like, if you were just on our Instagram thread, you could get most of the major keys out of our dream assessment report just by looking at what we posted on our thing and kind of like really narrowing it down, like to just a simple, like, hey, what would I do with my kids right now type idea. So those are kind of the main ways. And I guess the last thing I'll just say is that we're actually developing a resource library. So we're developing a resource library that will go through the same kind of CDR, like Black parent assessment process, where the strategies that are being translated are the strategies that people are saying, like, are right, kind of like going back to my original point about who the thought leaders are, who gets to say what evidence-based practice are. But essentially the idea is that that's what we're doing, right? Is that, like, we're putting those parents in positions to where they can be the validators of effective practice. And that'll be another place where we're actually translating these dreams and assessments that parents are finding on an ongoing basis. And this kind of ties to our ask, is like, of people who might be interested in doing their own dream assessment or might be interested in this process. Like, we definitely want to hear from y'all because, we're looking to kind of amass a pretty large resource of strategies that have been validated by Black parents in ways that are really similar to what we presented to y'all today.
Yeah. And I just want to, again, if we go back to We the Ones Who Dream, community solutions. So like re-narrating. So again, this started with 5 Black women, right? 5 Black women researchers who led this dream assessment. And then through the dream assessment, they created these dream mammoths, right? So again, they're driving another tool. Then they created the dream mammoths. And as Will said, then we convened Black parents who were homeschoolers in a room with Black parent researchers to talk about how do we take these dream mammoths and come up with practices and strategies, right? So again, they created the Keep Dreaming Toolkit. So this is another solution. We're giving you another tool for how you can build culturally affirming learning environments, right? So how you can protect Black genius. And so then not stop, they didn't stop with their solutions, right? Then they came up, we had a group of educators. We worked with a partner where a group of educators used the Keep Dreaming Toolkit developed by the parents. And then these educators created lesson plans, right? So we call this the Keep Dreaming Toolkit for educators that are now providing educators with strategies and lessons on how do you bring this into the classroom. And then again, y'all, we keep moving this work. Because sometimes, we're like, oh, we're done. And we wipe our hands and we say, we got that report, and we walk away. And we're continuing to take a deeper dive and say, hey, those dream mammoths, we can work with people who have to draft and develop policies and develop policy briefs around these dream mammoths to keep moving the work. So it's consistently community driving solutions, consistently these Black parents driving tools, driving the solutions they need for their community. And so I just wanted to reiterate and remind us about that journey and about the space that we're in and why we're here, to you all today. So just ending. So this is it. I think really, honestly, I'm gonna stop sharing and open up the space for some questions that you all may have or insights, and just honoring, you all here. I always say giving gratitude because we're all interacting in digital space, and sometimes it can be exhausting. Sometimes it takes its toll on our eyes and on our body, but always having gratitude for whoever is in this space and whatever brought you into this space. So we'll just open the floor up, time for some Q&A.
You know, I've always been impressed with essentially a sense of PTSD with parents of color and even low-income parents who have to deal with schools, and they get so beaten up, they come out just wounded. And so I'm impressed that you get past that first step and then can really expand it once they've become that group of 5. You give them the tools to expand it. But I wonder about how do you engage the greater population of, I mean, PTSD may be an extreme, but I don't think it is. I think of a story of in a Hispanic community where a grandmother was called by the school at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon and said that their 6-year-old had walked off from school with a broken CD player or something from some other kid, and she had to return it. The grandmother had to return it that day. She didn't have cars, she didn't have transportation. She had to figure out how to do it. I mean, it was cruel. It wasn't just, pure, it was just awful. And that's not atypical. And so then how do you get that population to move to be able to do the magic that you're now doing with them?
Yeah, I think it's a conversation that maybe was brought up earlier. So part of this is again, recognizing the systemic forces at play here. And one of the reasons that we don't talk a lot about, in addition to what you just talked about, Tom, is that we expect, and you did just kind of allude to it, we expect low-income parents, and oftentimes who also end up being parents of color because of the wealth gap in this country, to show up to places without resources, right? So the model of parent engagement in this country depends upon basically middle-class status or better. Because what comes with middle-class status? In a salary position where I'm making money and I have benefits, what I can do is I can take off from work, still be paid, get in my car and go somewhere and do this thing, right? But if I'm an hourly worker, right, I don't have that job. The second I leave my job, I'm losing income. On the top of the fact that in general, in this capitalistic society, the trade that we make oftentimes is intellect for money, or at least in a fair, quote unquote, capitalistic society, you should make that compensation. And so one of the very simple things that we do is a long-winded way of saying that we pay our parents. We give parents a stipend of about $30 an hour to help us with this work that we're doing. Why? Because that's going to, in most cases, supplant the income that they would be missing out on if they weren't spending time with us. And for a lot of them, that income is life-dependent income. And if it isn't life-dependent, they'll show up anyway, right? It's a nice thing to have on the side. But for a lot of parents, that is the reason why they can make this sacrifice. It's not because they don't want to be into it, but if you're asking me whether I'm gonna be able to participate in this research study or feed my children next week, that's an impossible question, right? So a big part of this is just saying and we've always had this built in our model, is that we compensate parents for the intellectual contributions. We can't be an organization that talks about we're translating the wisdom of Black parents into culturally affirming learning strategies, and we're raising all of these, at this point, millions of dollars to do our work. And then we don't give that money to the people. We're just as bad as the other exploiters, right? If that's not what we're doing. So I think that's something that we also have to think about. And I push back on a lot of researchers and other people. It's just y'all can't keep on going into these communities, extracting information and giving a $50 gift card and being oh, it's cool. That just doesn't work. And I think the non-monetary thing that I'll just give a quick shout out to Taylor Mary Weber Fields on our team, is she's kind of created this framework called a culture of care, which just simply means that there's a certain level of like care and an ethic of care that we must bring to our learning environments if we want to be able to really respect the humanity of the Black parents that we're asking to engage in this conversation. And so whenever that culture of care, that we don't hit that line, like Taylor Mary is one of the first people to be like, look, this ain't it, y'all. Like we gonna have to do better, because we can't be asking parents to give their tight time schedules to this particular situation if we're not gonna respect them, not just in a monetary way, but also to respect their humanity.
Beautiful.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Mhm.
No, I just said beautiful, that's all.
Oh, I was going to say, I do want to lift up, you were talking about some of the ways. So the strategy, the strategy around this is also like partnerships, right? So here, in Village of Wisdom, we talked about the educators. So part of our model is that educators need to be introduced to the Black Genius Framework, right? Educators need to feel, again, tap into their own personal power and efficacy to believe that they can, again, provide culturally informed instruction in the classroom. So if educators have that belief, and then now they have a partner, right? A partner is the Black parent in working through that and thinking through, how do I do instructional, culturally informed instructional design in the classroom? You now have two critical actors having conversation, right? So again, that's a partnership. Then when they have that conversation, then it translates up into the leader, the education leader. And I will say, Val currently does work around, we have a framework called Institutional Levers of Power Framework, where we work specifically with school leaders. And we do know that everybody's not ready for this. And that's okay. If you're not ready for this, you don't need to be on the train. But we, in understanding the levers of power, so we think about in community psychology, is not just Black parents, but knowing that Black parents have to be in partner with educators. The educators need to be in spaces where the leaders of these education institutions are committed to making this happen and building out some type of sustainability around this work. And so I think, again, that's the strategy in terms of moving forward when you're thinking about how do we create other systems that are embracing this, so that when people move from the village, from Val, there's these other critical and essential partners that they have in place to support this work. Any other? I just want to, I know people may have left, but I think Will may have put this out in the forum too. So we do want to share, you all, folks are interested in just learning more about how you can bring this to your community. Please fill out the form. But yeah, any other, go ahead, Kyra. Yes, we're in a space now. Just take yourself off mute.
Okay, I didn't want to interrupt. Thank you, Don, and thank you, William. And I went ahead and filled out the form because that may answer my question. But, I've been a little quiet just because I've just been kind of reflecting and absorbing, and also thinking about, I'm not in the education space, but more so in the maternal and child health equity space. But definitely, just listening to you all, there's a lot of overlap. We know that the Black genius is universal in that it transcends, education, healthcare, all of these things. And so a lot of the work that, I've been doing with Black moms and families around kind of that very essence of it, not necessarily specifically saying, the Black genius, but essentially this fight for centering Black families within space. And so I'm completing the form because I would like to know like how open you all are to kind of I guess learning community might be more of a formal kind of thing, but just I'd like to learn more, especially with the dream assessment and seeing if Village of Wisdom is open to, that type of consult or, leading dream assessments outside of the education space, like for example, partnering with others to bring that to, their community. So that was just what I've been kind of reflecting on, is seeing if, there's interest and opportunity for that in some way. Because I could see this being very powerful for a lot of the moms and families and partners that we do work with.
Yeah, I mean, I think for sure, Kyra, I think, so what we're actually starting is a bit of a leadership program for Black parents where they'll get trained in like these different areas. And so what I think there's kind of two ways, right? Like there's those mothers that you're engaging with, like we would love for them to be, maybe members of the next training cohort of parents that we go through, and they would come, to us, and we would talk about CDR and how they would engage in that stuff. And then what we've actually seen happen now tangibly is that these parents are being requested to join the research teams of other organizations or other projects that other organizations are running. So once they kind of come to us and get an understanding of like what research looks like and how to kind of think about the dreams and all this other stuff, and it's going to be about a year-long commitment. When they come out on the other side, now you have this person who has an understanding. Now they might have learned it in the education context, which we think, is helpful for pretty much everybody. But to your point, like the translation there is not super, I don't think it's super far. Like I think that those research skills would probably translate pretty well, even like in content areas. But I think there's also ways that we've been partnering with other organizations to leverage the dream assessment thing. So the one thing I should just say is that, like, we're trademarking dream assessment to kind of use and thinking about that for our own financial health as an organization. But we have worked with other organizations to support them in leveraging a dream assessment type process. And so that's something that we could also talk about too. And I don't know, Dawn, if you want to mention anything about that.
No, I think that's it. So Kyra, I will say we do have a partner we're working with now to replicate the dream assessment around early childhood education. And as Will said, our parents, more recently, we have 2 of our parents who've been asked by the county to serve on a council to develop a research project around mental health in terms of adults and children across the county. So of course, I want to say too, going back, like culturally affirming learning environment, the key is environment. So, as Will alluded to, like, yes, there's this idea of being inside of a classroom, but as he mentioned, there's being inside community and neighborhoods. And we know that to be in spaces where I am learning and I feel affirmed in my cultural reality and the identities in which they express, that's when I'm able to thrive. And so that is important to think beyond education, to think about the other systems that folks have to navigate into exist in.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, William.
Thank you. Any other questions or thoughts? We appreciate y'all. Yes. Go ahead, Sister Yvette. I see you.
I think she was just clapping.
I'm just applauding and honoring your work. Thank you again.
I'm in awe of the work that you're doing. I just think it's amazing. And the discussion, I just can see this going in a million ways and would love to think about, and maybe the audience is the one who has to do the work, not the 2 of you, about how to come back to a working session where we do what Kyra just did, bring our work and say, how can we use this model? Because it is, I mean, as I said, I've seen the asset deficit stuff work, but then when you shift the power and you move it that way, and I've talked to Dawn a lot about a project called the Right Question Project that teaches low-income parents and mainly parents of color how to ask the right question of the school, because if you ask the right question, you can make them move as opposed to screaming at them, which is what most of them want to do. And so there are lots of these incredible things that will change the system as opposed to us just talking about it. So I would love ideas from others as to how to take this to the next step, because this could move the field of community psychology. I'm quite in awe. So with great gratitude to the two of you for the presentation today, for everybody that's sticking with it. Is there anybody who wants to put out another question or comment?
Hello, this is Clarissa Hinton from Carolina Family Engagement Center. It was an honor to be a part of this presentation because the first thing I seen when I looked at the comments, I could see myself. And a lot of times when we're working with children, when you can see yourself, then you really get to see the dream that you can have because there are people who look like you. So I appreciate you all.
Great. Well,
thank you, Clarissa. We appreciate it.
Thank you again. Just spectacular. And we'll think about how to figure out a way to wrangle you back here, not to do more presentation, but to help us solve how this could affect the whole field, because I think it moves everybody. Thank you.